We all make dumb decisions in life, but in this case, I was stupid. Very stupid. I arranged to meet a guy off Tinder, but because of my heightened anxiety about driving, I stupidly arranged for him to pick me up outside of my house. I'd been talking to him for a few weeks at least, but that's still not redeemable. I know that. The choice I made on this day could have ended me, but thankfully I'm still around to tell this tale. The guy picked me up in his car and told me he planned to take us out for sushi. I love sushi, so I thought, great. He put the name of the restaurant into his GPS and we were off, making pleasant conversation along the way there. Until I started seeing woods when I looked out my window. I felt very confused. We were supposed to be going into town, not deep into the wilderness and in the middle of nowhere. Fear hit me hard then. He said,
I swear the GPS is taking me through here. I didn't choose this path.
Please, just get us back to civilization, I said. My eyes were wide and I must have looked like a deer in headlights. His face was completely apprehensive, so he must have known that I was scared completely shitless. I thought to myself, I should have just conquered my anxiety about driving and met him somewhere in public. Or better yet, not met with this guy at all. What was I thinking? I'm gonna get murdered here in these woods. I tried checking my phone to see if I could assist him with the GPS. That's when he said those spine-chilling words to me.
There's no signal out here.
I remember thinking to myself to try to just look calm. Don't let him think that you suspect he's onto something. But man, I was terrified. The tips of my fingers were cold while I was simultaneously sweating. If he was gonna kill me, part of me wanted him to just get it over with so I wouldn't be left with any of this anticipation. His forehead was sweating and he just kept saying,
I swear I'm not doing this. I'm trying to get us back en route to the sushi place.
I responded with, I don't care about sushi anymore. Just get us to a gas station. Anywhere with people at this point. He then said,
I don't have a shovel or weapon in my trunk or anything if that's what you're thinking.
Which obviously did little to calm my nerves. We finally reached the restaurant after what felt like an eternity. I'd never been so scared in my life. I didn't have much of an appetite and I was physically trembling when we arrived. But I figured he didn't kill me when he had the chance, so I guess it was safe now to continue with our date. I already planned on taking an Uber home because I didn't want to go through that experience again. I was shocked out of my mind when he then asked,
So, when do you think we'll have sex?
I nearly choked on the piece of sashimi. What? I had no idea where this was coming from. I didn't know how he could even ask me something like that on a first date, when he literally just saw me pale as a ghost just moments ago.
You know, like, how long will you make me wait for it? A day? A week? A month?
I stared at him, dumbfounded. Couldn't even find a response because I was utterly speechless in that moment.
Well, I can't wait a whole month. I'm just telling you that right now.
I didn't say anything, and the rest of the date was insanely awkward. I said goodbye as I took my Uber home, and only seconds after my driver pulled out of the restaurant parking lot, he texted me to say that he doesn't think it will work out because he needs a girl with a higher libido. Didn't even argue, just texted back a simple okay. Completely ready to be done with this man. When the Uber driver drove me home, he did not take me through the wilderness pathway of that potential murder site. He took me home through streets with other cars and lights. The sweetest scene to my immense relief. I couldn't help but wonder why my date had taken me through an hour drive through the wilderness just to get to a restaurant. But it only took the Uber driver 15 minutes to get me home from that same location. This entire thing was chilling. And I don't know if my date planned on anything sinister or if it was somehow just an honest mistake. Either way, I'm glad I made it out alive. I definitely learned a tough lesson that night. One that I should have already known. But I foolishly ignored for some reason. Don't let strangers from a dating app pick you up in their own car. And to the guy who took me through the woods, let's never meet again.
I used to work on the North Slope of Alaska in the oil industry. The work we were doing required us to travel far out into the Alaska Petroleum Reserve. which is basically just untamed tundra wilderness for hundreds of miles. The oil companies would build these long ice roads in the winter that would lead to exploration drilling pads. Our job was to go out after they finished the initial drilling and test rock formations for their oil-producing qualities. It was mid-January. The sun hadn't quite come up yet. And when I say the sun hadn't come up, I mean in almost a month and a half. Polar nights are intense. The particular well site that we were traveling to was about 60 miles west of Alpine, Alaska, deep in the wilderness. Our job took a week, but we finished, and we were heading back to camp to finish our hitch and go home. At the beginning and end of the ice roads are guard shacks that you have to check in and out of for safety. No cell reception, and radios work only up to a distance. If you don't check in or out at a set time, they come looking for you to ensure you're not a popsicle. It was about 4 a.m, not that it mattered in the land of endless night, and we were halfway across the ice road. Travel was slow as the speed limit on the road is only 25 miles an hour, and something appeared on the road in our headlights. It was a man in jeans, sneakers, and a hoodie jacket, walking down an ice road in the wilderness tundra at 4 a.m., and it was like negative 20 degrees outside. It's not unusual for the local Inuit people to be out this far hunting. Maybe his snowmobile broke down and he's trying to get back to the guard shack. Seemed plausible. He didn't acknowledge us as our truck rolled up next to him. He just kept shuffling forward. His clothing, while totally not appropriate for this extreme weather, appeared warm and dry. We also noticed he wasn't Inuit, but Caucasian. I rolled down my window and asked if he needed any help and if he was okay. He still didn't acknowledge us, just kept shuffling forward. His face was completely blank, devoid of any thought or emotions. The other guys in the truck suggested that maybe he was in an accident and in shock. I continued rolling my truck alongside him as he trudged along down the road, still trying to get his attention. Even in this extreme cold, I could occasionally get whiffs of a peculiar smell. It was coming off of him. He smelled acidic, if that makes any sense. There was just a lot about this guy that made the hair on my neck stand up. The guy behind me in the truck's crew cab had had enough of it all. He rolled down his window and reached out to grab the guy. He later said that he was just going to try to shake him out of his stupor. Before my buddy's hand could reach him, though, this walking popsicle spun around and latched onto my buddy's outstretched arm. He glared at my buddy and then at me, with this look of pure rage, not removing his hand from his arm. If emotions had a physical temperature, this guy could have melted the entire tundra that night. My buddy groaned in pain as he tried to get his arm free from Mr. Popsicle. At that moment, this guy started screaming in our faces. There was so much hate and rage and anger in that scream. It was absolutely terrifying. I slammed on the gas and spun out on the ice for a second before the wheels caught and launched us forward. Popsicle Dude is still holding on to my buddy's arm, and he's trying to pull him out of the truck. He was running alongside the truck, while the other guys in the cab held on to my buddy to keep him inside. After several moments, it could have only been a few seconds at most, my buddy tore free from this guy, and we hauled ass to the guard shack another 30 miles down the road. We checked in with the guards and reported what we had just seen. The guard was looking at us like we were pulling a prank. The policy said that they had to check it out regardless. My buddy's arm was sore, and when he pulled back his sleeve, there were noticeable bruises in the shape of a hand all around his arm. We filed a report with the guard and were told to head back to our camp. None of us really wanted to talk about what happened, and it was a quiet drive the rest of the way. We flew home the next day. The next time we saw the guard at the shack, we asked him if they saw Mr. Popsicle on their patrol. He told us they searched up and down that ice road for 12 hours, and they saw nothing. Not even tracks in the snow leading off the road. He told us it was a good prank, and that he'd get us back for making him waste a shift driving around. But it wasn't a prank. Who would make up a story like that? And who would be willing to bruise their own arm for a dumb prank? We never got a satisfying answer to what happened that evening. I still wonder about that dude, if he even was a dude. The Alaskan tundra is a weird place, and that was just one of my many weird stories from my time up there. I'll work on writing down more of my experiences and share them to the appropriate subs.
This happened back in 2004 in northern Wisconsin. I was 16 at the time, and I was out deer hunting with my dad and one of his friends, Frank. I do remember this day like it was yesterday, though. The dialogue itself isn't word for word, but the idea of it is 100% accurate. My dad and I had a few different stands over an area, maybe 3/4 square mile. He'd been hunting there for at least 10 years, and I'd been going with him since I was around 5. Up until I was about 12, I had just been tagging along. On this particular morning, we walked to my stand first. It was about 5 a.m., and it was still dark outside. I got situated, and my dad and Frank went off to the other 2 stands over a ridge. It was maybe 500 to 600 yards off. Sitting there in the dark is always a little eerie. Not long after my dad and Frank left, I see a flashlight from the general direction of where they headed. Maybe 200 yards away, roughly moving in my direction. I figured they forgot something from the truck, so I radioed to see what they were doing.
"We're sitting in my stand. Frank is about to head to the other one,"
my dad said. Obviously, this flashlight is someone else. This isn't super common, and it's really a big deal. Those woods get crowded sometimes, and there is a spot to park in that general direction. I turn on my light so the other hunter can see that there is someone here. He stops, and then I see the light turn and go into a different direction. No big deal. I end up dozing off while it's still dark out anyway. When I wake up, the sun is now up, and it's around 8 a.m. I sit there for a bit, radio my dad to see if he has seen or heard anything moving. Nothing yet. A couple of gunshots go off in the distance. I got up and then go for a slow walk to get my blood moving a bit. Not far, maybe 30 yards out and then back, trying not to make a sound. I come back to my stand, sit down and take a real good look around. Nothing really going on. I finally look out to my left, where I'd seen that flashlight before, and I see orange. For anyone unfamiliar, hunters have to wear blaze orange during gun season. So I then radio my dad and Frank to see if either one of them was moving around. Dad again says no, and I hear nothing from Frank. I grab the binoculars out of my backpack to see if maybe it is Frank, and it's definitely not. This guy is looking at me through his scope, rifle aimed directly at me. This is obviously a huge no-no, massive rule we all learn in hunter's education. Never point your rifle at something you don't intend to shoot. Still, dumb people still do it. It's obviously few and far between, but it definitely happens. And this is why normal people use binoculars. My first thought is, what is this guy doing? And the thing is, even with me looking at him, he doesn't put his gun down. Now I'm starting to panic, thinking I'm going to be the next hunting murder victim. I slowly grab my rifle get up, staying behind as many trees as I can, and walk down a little path to the side of my stand. My stand was on this little knoll on the side of a much bigger hill. I then radio my dad and tell him what's going on. He tells me to sit tight and stay out of sight. Obviously, as a 16-year-old, I couldn't do that and had to keep looking. Every time I looked, that guy was still aiming in my direction, but was always standing in a different spot. Like I would go to look, go back to hiding, look again, and he would be 30 yards from where he was the last time. About 10 minutes of this goes by when my dad radios me.
How you doing, bud?
Looking back, he was obviously trying to keep me calm at the time, and I thought he just wasn't taking me seriously. He's still there, but he keeps moving. I don't know what his problem is. Dad told me to just keep hidden and he'll figure it out, that he'd be coming up near him in about a minute or two. And that's when I heard the shot. I lost my mind trying to get a hold of my dad. Did he just get shot? Where is he? Did he have to shoot that guy? What is going on? I sit there for maybe 2 to 3 minutes and felt like hours.
Alright, come on out and head towards my stand.
I peek up a little over the knoll, and I see my dad waving from along the ridge the random guy had been on. I make the trek on over to him to see what happened. Turns out Frank was feeling a little restless. Took us a little stroll and ended up on the other side of that particular ridge that stranger was on, not even knowing he was there. He had knocked his radio battery loose while he was getting situated earlier that morning, and had no idea anything was even going on. The shot I heard was actually Frank shooting a deer. Dad said as soon as Frank shot, the guy walked off away from us toward that logging road. We helped Frank out with his deer and decided to call it an early day. Although I was extremely nervous, the rest of the week went on with no incident. So to the dumbass stranger in the woods with absolutely no common sense, to never ever meet again.
I'm a female in my late 20s, and this happened fairly recently. Nothing bad happened to me, but I'm lucky it didn't, and it easily could have. There's a conservation area that I used to like to walk in regularly. It's beside a golf course, near an ordinary subdivision, just off a busy road, and it's popular with dog walkers, photographers. The conservation area is fairly well maintained and alerts its users that there are hidden cameras everywhere. My point in bringing attention to all of this is to say that, by all accounts, this is a very safe, vanilla, urban wooded area in a populated area. One big thing about me is that I like isolation to recharge. I dislike crowded trails, and by convention go in off-peak hours, or when the weather is unpleasant. Not dangerous, just unpleasant. Too cold, lightly raining, foggy, etc. I stay safe, but I like there to be as few people around as possible. In a city, in daylight, I don't feel like I'm taking any risks by doing this. There was one day that I went around 4 p.m. or so on a frigid, rainy Monday in November. On days like that, there are maybe only 1 or 2 dog walkers, but today, there was no car in the parking lot, except for a dirty blue pickup truck with a man sitting in it. I noticed that he was looking at me, but that didn't really bother me. I was just happy to see the trail was empty. On this particular day, I went to the area to practice my navigation skills. I was learning how to use a compass at the time, and it's good to practice that skill in an area that you won't get lost. So, I decided to go off the trail to a big pine plantation, which is a big open area with large, mature pine trees, if you're not familiar. It's not a hiking area or really that interesting in any way, and definitely off trail. You wouldn't get there unless you really wanted to get there. So I pick my first landmark and sight it using my compass, and I'm pacing towards it. I find myself about halfway there when I hear rustling through the bushes. I turn around and I see the man from the dirty blue pickup is there, entering the pine plantation. Mid-50s white man, a little pudgy, wearing a baggy beige cardigan and blue slacks. I feel pretty alert at this point. Feels out of place somehow. I take note but pretend to keep walking around with my compass because I don't want to seem weird. I look at him. He pretends to ignore me. I'm getting a really bad gut feeling about the situation. For some reason at this point, I feel like he's following me. But I have an anxiety disorder, so I try not to freak out for zero reason. And I don't want to ruin my relaxation time. It's just a guy walking around. No big deal. To see if he's following me, I pivot 180 degrees and I walk directly towards the trail again. He's still following me. I walk through the bushes onto the trail, still following me. At this point, I was freaked out. The pine plantation entrance is only about 50 feet on the trail, so this guy would have walked 50 feet, entered the pine plantation, then decided that was it for the day. Bad odds. Definitely following me. I quickly exit the trail, and when I'm leaving the parking lot, I see that he's still looking at me. I take the long way home. The experience freaks me out, and I only visit the area once before the second encounter. This time, it was January. I wanted to go bird watching. A week prior, I'd seen an owl in the same pine plantation. I was practicing navigation again, and I wanted to see it again. I'd seen it about an hour before sundown, so I figured that was a good time to try to see it again in the same area. I checked the parking lot, and there was no blue pickup truck, but there were 2 other cars with men. One was a red sedan with heavily tinted windows, and it looked like the other one was empty. So I go on the trail again. Today is muddy, wet, cold. Area should be totally empty. Good. Unfortunately, not so. About 20 feet on the trail, I hear footsteps behind me. I don't like when people walk behind me, but it's not a crime, and I'll lose them soon when I go to the pine plantation. I'm sure you know where this is going. When I walk on the pine plantation, there's the same rustling of the bushes as before, and when I turn around, I see the same man from before. I feel a wave of terror and dread overcome me, alone in a muddy forest with a possible stalker. But it's still so calm, and it feels so mundane. To confirm my fears, I walk over to the area where I saw the owl last week, and I pause to look for it. Who do I see next to me? The same freaking guy from before. I'm terrified at this point, and every part of me is screaming, "Run." So I walk as fast as I can to the trail again. I pass some other random guy in the same pine plantation, and I smile at him, just totally on autopilot. He smiles back. It wasn't until I was in the parking lot that I get freaked out that there was a second person in the same pine plantation. Could they have been connected somehow? I stop briefly in the parking lot and take out a small notepad to quickly write down the license plates of the 2 cars. This gives the original man time to catch up to the parking lot. I'm booking it now, on foot, out of the parking lot, and he yells towards me, "Can I give you a ride?" And I just shake my head and keep walking. As I walk away, he begins to follow me in his car. He waits at the intersection to see which direction I'm going in, and I decide to walk in a busy park to lose him. He pulls into a nearby hidden driveway and stares at me, and he takes out his phone to presumably take a photo of me. He notes what direction I'm walking in, then does a U-turn and drives fast the other way. Conclusion: I took the long way home, filled out a police report, and the police opened an investigation on it. I have not gone back to the conservation area since, and the experience has definitely left me with an ongoing nervousness about being alone. Doubly, more because I don't know who the second guy is. I passed him so quickly, I only know that he was in his mid-50s and had glasses and was bald. The police unfortunately told me that there's nothing they can really do at this point. So the best I can do is stay vigilant and try not to let it freak me out too much. Unfortunately, this has totally ruined my love for going out into the wilderness alone. Nothing bad happened, but I think that was more because I was able to escape and lose him or them before anything did happen.
Weird things happen in the Appalachian Mountains. They're as old as time itself, and the people who have lived there will be the first to tell you that it can be otherworldly. And sometimes you just have to turn a blind eye for some of your own sanity and just kind of be like, yep, this is just how it is. I grew up in a small town outside of Pisgah National Forest. Lots of waterfalls, great hikes, beautiful views. It's an amazing place to be, especially during the summer. But what happened to me was in the dead of winter, when I was around 17. Before I write all this, let me preface it by saying that at the time, I had just gotten my very first prescription for glasses, and was still not used to keeping them on 24/7. Although my vision was a bit blurry, I know something was there with me the day this happened. So when I was 17, I decided to do my senior project on nature photography. And what better place to take some photos than the forest? So I asked my mother if she'd drive me to Pisgah and let me take those pictures as we winded through the woods. It was winter, so the trees were bare and the sky was gray. It was still a fairly pretty day, and I just wanted some pictures of the local flora. So my mom pulls over to let me walk down a trail I'd been down 100 times. After a short little walk through the woods, you'd end up on the riverbank. And the way the bank curved, you could walk along the little stony shore a little ways past the trail. Mind you, I was wearing a bright orange raincoat, so I was incredibly visible. I'm crouching down to take a picture of a cool little railroad spike that had been sticking out of the earth for years. And all of a sudden, I realize there's no noise. Like, scarily silent. No birds chirping, no nature sounds, nothing. It's like I didn't even hear the sound of water flowing. As this is happening, I suddenly realize exactly how visible and vulnerable I am. If you've ever experienced that primal sort of fear, and you know what I mean, it was like alarm bells went off in my head going, danger, danger. As I'm sitting there with this feeling washed completely over me, I start to hear crunching of footsteps. Again, all the trees were bare, so there really wasn't any foliage to block any of my view. I hear these footsteps that sound like 2 feet get closer and closer to the river on the opposite side of the bank. I'm watching it very closely. I couldn't move. Whatever I saw was all gray and definitely not a human, but tall and appeared to be on 2 legs. It was getting closer and closer. And right as it was about to reach the riverbank, I snapped out of that trance and turned and hightailed it back. I have never been more scared or ran that fast in my life. I booked it back to my mom's car and was obviously out of breath. As she's asking me what happened. After I explained to her, she looked very worried and said, while I'd been down the trail, she got this weird sudden fear that something was wrong. and was actually about to come find me when I ran back. We left after that, and to this day, sometimes we will talk about it, but we still have no real explanation. I told my boyfriend this story, and he insists it could have been a skinwalker. I have no idea what it was, and although I wish I'd gotten a better look, I'm also glad I ran away when I did. Has anyone experienced anything like this in a similar area? Or anywhere, for that general matter? I've posted this on another thread back in August, but I figured I'd share it again. Of the countless hours I've spent in the woods, it's the one time for only a few seconds that I can't explain. I distance hike when I can, and sometimes this means getting up early or staying out late to get as many miles in as possible. And sometimes that means walking in the pitch dark with a low light headlamp, and it gets spooky. I grew up in the woods of this area. I've slept under a canopy of stars more nights than I can even count. I've trekked thousands of miles of trails, riverbanks, lake shores, ridges, bottoms, bogs, and creeks. I've hunted the game. I'm establishing this because it's important you understand I've heard, seen, and smelt all about this region and that it has to offer in the way of wilderness. My scariest experience, though, happened about at 4:30 in the morning. It was late spring, so the first morning light wouldn't be visible in the treetops for maybe another 30 to 45 minutes. Another hour passed until sunrise, and I was on mile 5. I'm on a low bottom that's wedged between two steep ridges. The trail I'm on was narrow, muddy, and completely hemmed in by a thick underbrush, with young maple and old oak growth. I'm focused on the small light from my headlamp, just one step after the other, completely zoned out. Then I hear a loud crack, and I froze solid. This is the part I have trouble describing. 04:30 in the springtime means I'm the only thing making noise. No birds chirping, nothing. Dead quiet. Mid-step I froze. When fight or flight kicks in, you have these immediate instinct thoughts. The thought that I instantly flashed in my mind as I stood there balancing myself into silence was, if I hear that again, I'm turning around and I'm going back the way I came in a hurry. Why? Because that sound was not a branch breaking. It wasn't deadfall. It wasn't a widowmaker. I was damn sure I just heard something intentional. Hearing it twice, well, that meant get the hell out of here. To describe it as best as I can, it sounded like a decent-sized wooden stick being violently whacked against a smallish tree, more a fungo bat-sized stick than a baseball bat. The distinction in my head being that this sound was a crack, not a thud or a thump. And I have described it as explosive in the past because it was so sudden and so terribly loud. I had the sense that it was about 50 yards directly in front of me. It was loud and it was clear. Now as I stood there, completely spooked, I realized the soon-to-be worst part of my situation. I knew where the sound came from, and I knew where the trail went. In about 30 yards, I was going to come to a 180-degree turn and start up the ridge going away from the creek. This meant as soon as I got the courage to move towards the noise, I was going to have my back turned to it and get up that ridge. And that made me very nervous. My head's somewhere between meth fiend murderer and Bigfoot bludgeoning. Minutes pass. I just breathe my foggy breath into my glasses and listen. Still nothing, still dead quiet. I've got maybe 20 or 30 minutes until first light. I crank up the headlamp and start to slowly creep towards the 180 turn. When you wear a headlamp in the woods at night, every tree branch in front of you casts a big black moving shadow on the trail, and this definitely didn't help. I get to the turn and quickly make the bend. I'm moving pretty fast at this point, trying to be quiet, taking tiny, shallow breaths so I can listen while humping it up the trail. And then I smell it. A stench hits me that I can't describe. I just imagined wet, rotten death. I've actually worked scenes where humans have expired in a past life as a firefighter, and this was like days-old decomposition, but it just smelled strange. Kept walking fast, and by the time I made it to the top of that ridge, I was huffing, and the first light was showing, but I didn't stop until the full light was out and the birds were chirping. I've heard it all in our woods. I've smelled it all. I'm telling you, I don't know what the hell that was. Deadfall and especially leaved out branches make a lot of noise on the way down. I've heard it many times. I just don't know.